We'll be learning about the female reproduction that is relevant with respect to physiology. So, first we'll start off by understanding the process of regulation of female reproduction. Just as we have seen in our class of male reproduction, similarly here also there is this famous model called the 2-cell to gonadotrophin model. Right? Now let's understand what is this model. Right? The gonadotrophin releasing hormone, which is released from the hypothalamus, we all know that it activates the anterior pituitary. Okay, and from the anterior pituitary we have two important hormones that are released. These are the luteinizing hormone and the follicle stimulating hormone. Now where do these act, each one of them? The luteinizing hormone acts on the Theca cells and the follicle stimulating hormone acts on the Granulosa cells. Now what do these Theca cells do? They release Androstenedione. This Androstenedione goes and acts on the Granulosa cells. So when this Androstenedione reaches the Granulosa cells, it is acted upon by the aromatase enzyme and finally converted into estrogen. So that is how estrogen is formed. Right. With that note, let's proceed to the menstrual cycle. Okay. Now we know that menstrual cycle is nothing but the cyclical changes in the ovary, endometrium, cervix and the vagina. So all of these structures undergo certain cyclical changes. Together we are calling it as the menstrual cycle. However, especially for the ovarian changes, we are terming it as the ovarian cycle. Okay. Now, let's see what is this ovarian cycle all about. So, it is broadly divided into three main types, that is the follicular phase, the phase of ovulation and finally the luteal phase. Now, let's start off with the follicular phase. What happens is, it is controlled by follicle stimulating hormone. Follicular phase, obviously follicle stimulating hormone. So, here it stimulates 15 to 20 follicles in the ovary. Right? The FSH goes and stimulates about 15 to 20 follicles. But we all know that only one of these follicles is going to become what we call as the dominant follicle, or famously known as the Graafian follicle. Right? So, one of the follicle out of these 15 to 20 follicles becomes the dominant or the Graafian follicle. Now, how is it selected? Why does only one follicle become the dominant follicle? It's a very good question. Let's understand how it happens. It is selected on the basis of the maximum FSH receptors, high aromatase activity and highest estrogen levels. So, the follicle out of these 15 to 20 which has the maximum FSH receptors, highest aromatase activity and highest estrogen level is going to be the dominant follicle. Okay. Now, another important exam bit for you over here. The highest estrogen level in the female is seen just prior to ovulation. Okay. Highest estrogen level in the body occurs just prior to ovulation. Now, let's proceed to the second stage, that is the ovulation phase. We know that it occurs on the 14th day of the cycle. Okay. Now, what happens is, we have just seen that highest estrogen level is seen just prior to ovulation. So, this high estrogen level causes an increased LH level as well, that is luteinizing hormone. This is nothing but a kind of positive feedback mechanism. Okay. So, this high estrogen level results in an increased LH level by the mechanism of positive feedback. So, when does this LH level increase? So, there are two types of increases in the LH level. Let's understand the difference between these two. The first one we are looking at is LH surge. Okay, and it occurs 36 hours before ovulation. Okay, that is LH surge, and LH peak is occurring 8 to 10 hours before ovulation. See, if this is the graph representing LH level, just when there is an increase in estrogen by positive feedback, see my LH level is increasing, it is peaking over here. This phenomenon we are terming as LH surge, right? And the top of this graph we are calling it as LH peak. Okay, is the difference clear? So LH surge occurs 36 hours prior to ovulation, whereas LH peak occurs 8 to 10 hours prior to ovulation, right? This concept is clear now. Now, It's not just enough if we have the LH, we also require FSH surge to lyse the follicle wall and release your ovum. Okay, so both the surges are required, LH surge and FSH surge. FSH surge is required for lysing the follicular wall, finally resulting in release of the ovum, right? Now another important point you have to note here is there is always a rise in body temperature when these two steps are occurring, and it rises by 0.5 to 1 degree Fahrenheit. Okay, so this is an important exam bit. Please remember, always there is a rise in body temperature during ovulation. Now let's proceed to the third phase, that is the luteal phase. Once the ovulation has occurred, it forms something called corpus hemorrhagicum. Now what is that? It is nothing but a Graafian follicle that is filled with blood. Corpus, we know corpus means body, right? Hemorrhagicum, something related to blood. So a body that is filled with blood, that is Graafian follicle with its wall filled with blood, that is corpus hemorrhagicum. Now this blood forms into clots after some duration. Yes, whenever blood is there, it forms clots, and it results in the formation of luteal cells. What are these? These are yellow colored cells that are formed under the influence of LH. That is why they are called luteal cells. These luteal cells, when they are present in the Graafian follicle, it is now called as corpus luteum. Corpus, body, luteum having luteal cells. Luteum means yellow color. Okay, so it is a body filled with yellow color cells, that is corpus luteum. Here another important phenomenon we can notice is there is a rise of LH. Okay, now when the corpus luteum is formed, progesterone is released. So progesterone is the fourth hormone to rise during ovulation. The first three hormones we have seen, number 1 was estrogen, right? Number 2 LH, number 3 FSH, the fourth one you seeing here is progesterone. Please remember these in this order. Okay, so the fourth hormone to rise in the ovulatory cycle is the progesterone. Ultimately, this progesterone results in the degeneration of corpus luteum. Okay, and this occurs 10 days after ovulation, that is on the 24th day, because ovulation is occurring on the 14th day, right? So degeneration of corpus luteum occurs exactly 10 days after that. It will be the 24th day of the cycle. All of this occurs obviously when there is an unfertilized ovum, right? However, if there is fertilization, it proceeds into pregnancy. That is a whole different topic. Now let's proceed to understand endometrial changes. Okay. Now, similar to the ovarian cycle, endometrial changes also have 3 phases. These are the proliferative phase, number 1, number 2, your secretory phase, number 3 is your menstrual phase. Okay. Now, proliferative phase is a phase in which it is preparing the endometrium to receive the fertilized ovum. Okay. So, it is preparing the uterus to propagate the pregnancy. So, what will happen here? The endometrial thickness is increasing along with lengthening of uterine glands. So, 2 changes are occurring in the proliferative phase. Increase in the endometrial thickness and lengthening of uterine glands, right? Next, the secretory phase, here the endometrial thickness is the highest, okay? And the uterine glands secrete clear fluid. Okay. Now, when there is no fertilization occurring, we know that it will proceed to the menstrual phase. What happens here? Yes, there is a shedding of the endometrium. However, what you have to remember for the exam is only the superficial 2/3 of the endometrium is shed. Okay. Now, this part of the endometrium is supplied by spiral arteries, right? They undergo constriction and degeneration due to this element, that is PGF2 alpha. Please memorize this. PGF2 alpha causes constriction and degeneration of the endometrial vessels, that is the spiral arteries. They undergo constriction and degeneration, resulting in a shedding and blood loss, right? Very simply understandable form of endometrial changes. Now let's understand the cervical and vaginal changes during the menstrual cycle. Coming to the cervical changes, first one we are looking at is the cervical mucus and how it changes, and the next will be the changes that occur during the menstrual phase. The cervical mucus is thinner due to estrogen, right? Because it has to permit the smooth transit of the sperms for fertilization, right? That is why in the first half of the cycle, the cervical mucus is thin, right? And it is the thinnest during the time of ovulation, okay? Now, after this occurs, the cervical mucus becomes thick because it is under the influence of progesterone, and we know that finally it becomes very thick when there is pregnancy and forms something called as the mucus plug, right? When we talk about the menstrual phase, there are two types of cells. These are the superficial cells and the intermediate cells. The superficial cells show high estrogen activity, whereas the intermediate cells show high progesterone activity. Now, these are the cervical changes that occur in the menstrual cycle. Now, let's look at some important female hormones. Now, we know that there are two types of female sex hormones. These are the steroids and the protein hormones, right? The steroids, yes, that's right, we all are familiar, that is estrogen and progesterone, okay? And the protein hormones, these are of three types. Number 1 is inhibin B, number 2 is activin, number 3 is your relaxin. Okay, inhibin, activin and relaxin are protein hormones, whereas estrogen and progesterone are steroid hormones. Okay, now let's proceed to understand estrogen in detail. Estrogen, what you have to remember for the exam, is a C18 steroid. Okay, estrogen is a C18 steroid and it is broadly of three types: estradiol, estriol and estrone. Estradiol, di means 2, right? It is E2, right? Estriol is tri. Tri means 3, okay? E3. And estrone, on, that is 1, that is E1. That is how you can remember. Estradiol, estriol and estrone, okay? Estradiol is seen in reproductive age group, whereas estriol is seen in pregnancy and estrone is seen following menopause, okay? So estradiol, when there are two people, that is in reproductive age group, right? Estriol, that is when these two people become 3, that is occurs during pregnancy, and obviously the left out one is estrone, that is seen in menopause. That is how you can remember easily, okay? And the major actions are seen on the uterus, number 1, followed by the breast, bone, kidney, and also in the development of secondary sexual characters. Okay, now let's learn these actions in detail. On the uterus, estrogen primes the uterus, okay? That is, it increases contractility, excitability and also the gap junctions. It increases the number of gap junctions, right? And finally, estrogen increases the uterine sensitivity to oxytocin, which is very crucial for the occurrence of normal labor, okay? So, estrogen increases everything, increases contractility, excitability, the gap junctions as well as the sensitivity to oxytocin, right? To result in normal labor. On the breast, it increases the ductal growth in the breast, okay? That is why it is called as the growth hormone of the breast. Now, if you have the question, which of the following is the growth hormone of the breast? Your answer will be estrogen, okay? Now, on the bone, what does it do? It is a bone-friendly hormone in the reproductive age group of the females, right? Why is it bone-friendly? Because obviously it will prevent bone resorption. Okay. Now, an important compound, that is osteoprotegrin, OPG, that is produced by estrogen, inhibits the rank ligand, further preventing bone resorption. Okay. So, the main important compound is the osteoprotegrin. It protects the bones. You can remember like that. Okay. And on the kidney, it results in sodium and water retention. And we have also seen it results in the development of secondary sexual characters in the females, right? With that note, let's proceed to progesterone. Now, like estrogen, progesterone is a C21 steroid. Estrogen was C18, right? Progesterone is C21 and its major actions are on the uterus, breast, kidney, CNS and also has a thermogenic action. Now, let's see what it does to the uterus. It is an anti-estrogen hormone. Simple, right? So, it will reduce the excitability and the contractility. And on the breast, however, it increases the lobular and alveolar growth of the breast. That is to aid in breastfeeding post-pregnancy, right? The next one on the kidney, it is opposite to estrogen. It causes sodium and water excretion, okay? Just opposite to estrogen. So, it induces diuresis. Also, it is a CNS depressant, and this is thermogenic. That means it increases the body temperature by half to 1 degree Fahrenheit, that is during ovulation. Okay. So on the uterus it is anti-estrogen, on the kidney it is anti-estrogen. On the breast it causes growth, and CNS causes depression, and thermogenic, that is it increases body temperature, right? Now let's proceed to the protein hormones. We have seen that there are three main types. They are the inhibin B, activin and relaxin. Okay. Inhibin B, the major sources are granulosa cells, and we know that these are acted upon by FSH. We have already seen that. So they cause a negative feedback mechanism to maintain the hormone level. Next, activin increases the FSH level, and relaxin, as the name suggests, it relaxes the pubic symphysis and dilates and softens the cervix. So what is it leading to? Very obvious. It will help in delivery of the fetus. It relaxes pubic symphysis, dilates and softens the cervix. That's the function of relaxin. With that note, let's proceed to the most important topic, that is lactation. Okay. So there are three important steps that will finally result in lactation. These are number 1, mammogenesis, number 2, lactogenesis, number 3, galactokinesis, right? Mammogenesis, as the name suggests, is nothing but development of the breast, right? So we have just seen estrogen causes ductal growth, whereas progesterone causes alveolar and lobular growth, right? Lactogenesis is nothing but production of milk. Which is the hormone? The famous one, that is prolactin. Lactin aids in lactation. So prolactin causes lactogenesis, and once the milk is produced, it has to be ejected out of the breast. That procedure we are calling galactokinesis, that is milk ejection that occurs by suckling, which results in increased oxytocin. This is termed as milk ejection reflex, and it is a type of neuroendocrine reflex. So when the baby suckles, it causes an increase in oxytocin, which results in ejection of the milk. This is called the milk ejection